There's always someone in our life who we think about often. Not necessarily because we miss them or hate them or want them back in our lives. There's someone who we just wish we could have a final conversation with. A resolution of sorts. Closure. Unfortunately for some of us, that person is already gone. While there may be regrets over the conversation that could have been, we live with the hope that that person left knowing our true feelings. Luckily for Anthony Milian, he had that chance. After decades of hardship with his father, Anthony was able to say his piece, leaving his father with forgiveness and allowing Anthony to more clearly see the beautiful life he built for himself and his family. I'm Liz Rebecca, and today we look at the complexities of the father-son relationship. This is In Confianza. When we initially talked with Anthony about this season, he shared the experiences he faced as the youngest in a family of siblings much older than him, and how he found grace for a dad who was in and out of his life. For this episode, I hand the reins over to our producer, Mark Pagán, who coincidentally grew up very similarly to how Anthony did. Passing it to you, Mark.
Now, you and I have some similarities and some differences. I grew up as a Boricua kid in suburban Maryland. I was just outside of DC, and it didn't really hit me how isolated I was in my Boricua-ness until I got older and I started interacting. I moved to New York. I started interacting with New Yorican folks. And they would say things to me like, "Well, you got an accent, man." And I'd say, "What do you mean?" I had no idea that even both either my Spanish or when I spoke English, which is what I was raised with, had any tinge of an accent. Now, on your side, you're a New Yorican guy living in South Carolina, and I'm curious how people interact with you and your New Yoricanness in the South.
Face value, I'm Black, so people don't see Puerto Rican. But when people see my name or they, Anthony Modesto Milian, it becomes like what's that? That's not like us, Or there's a couple of times where when I was working in an office, I'd take the elevator and people would hear me speak Spanish, like on the phone or something like that. And they'd say, "Where are you from?" My Spanish is very 50-50. Like in the words of Celia Cruz, "It's no very good looking." 90% of the time people say, "Oh, this is a Black guy," right?
So you become sort of like an education form for folks.
Right. A novelty and an education, an occasional form, educational form.
With both of us growing out back east and then moving around, that is one similarity. But the other thing too, and this came up when we first talked initially, is that you and I, we both had older fathers and we both had much older siblings who we had very interesting, sometimes distant relationships with. Tell me about the dad in your life, and tell me about the brothers in your life as well.
I had older parents compared to when people traditionally have children. And my dad started having children a little early. Growing up, my brothers were substantially older than me. Essentially, we didn't have much of a relationship because my siblings were so much older than me. By the time I was coming of age, they were, they owned homes and had whole families and things like that. It wasn't necessarily a bonding experience. My dad, growing up, he wasn't really around, to be honest with you. He was around sometime, but it was never really consistent. Like it's not like I would see him. I wouldn't see him every day. I may have seen him once every other month, once every 6 months. So there was no consistency. So my mom was very sick. My mom had renal failure. She had COPD. She had a lot of issues. Like her body was shutting down. And I remember it was junior high school graduation. And, they give you these little rings, but at the time they were like $70, $80 and my mother didn't have it. So she called my father, Anthony wants this ring for he's graduating from junior high school. And my mother took the train all the way from Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. It was either all the way to the Bronx or all the way to downtown Brooklyn to meet him, and he didn't show up. And I just remember how upset she was. And like, I remember like her calling him and, being like, I waited for you. And he's basically kind of like, it was almost like he didn't care. Now that I look back at pictures of mommy, she was really sick. You don't realize how sick someone is until you like look at pictures of them. Like you see somebody every day and you're like, this person looks the same because you see them every day. There's no change. But you don't see the progression of someone's illness until you look back at pictures of them and you're like, my mom's face was sunken in. She had deep bags under her eyes. She had lost a ton of weight. She was legitimately sick. Her calves had swollen up because her heart was failing and her body was pooling fluid. Now that I think about it, I'm mad, but I don't think at the time I was mad. When my biological mother died, I went to live with my aunt and I wouldn't see him I saw him for like a year after she died, and then I didn't see him at all. It wasn't until later on when I had gone to college, I like literally Google searched his name. He was going to Kingsborough Community College, right down the street from my house, because I lived in Sheepshead Bay at the time. I emailed them and I was like, I think this is my father. The guy who received the email said, because of laws and privacy laws, I can't tell you who that is, but I could send your email to him.
What made you send that email to your dad?
I got curious because I hadn't seen him in years. I had been on Google trying to look up something for a project for a class I was taking. And I Googled his name, and there was an article that came up at Kingsborough Community College about the Veterans Affairs program. And boom, there was his picture right there.
What was it like to see that picture?
I realized how much he aged. I hadn't seen him in like 5 years. And I was like, yeah, when you're young, you don't really age as fast. But the older you get, you age faster. And I was like, damn, this is not the same man from 5 years ago. He had aged quite a bit. He was completely bald. His eyebrows had turned like white. And now I'm going bald right here and I have gray hair in the back. And I'm like, oh gosh, it's repeating itself.
Yeah, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
No, not at all.
So you reached out to him, you talked to the person at Kingsborough. Anyway, the email went through and you got a reply from him. What was your response to that? How did you feel when you got the email?
I felt excited because I hadn't spoken to him for so long. I didn't know what to expect. So the fact that he was willing to reach out to me, but then I also was like, man, he was going to college right near where I lived and never stopped to say hi, never anything. Like I have a son and I see my son every single day. Like I could pull up an app right now on my phone and see where my son is at all time. Right. And like, he just was like, I guess he's okay. He's getting taken care of. But then later on, after talking to him, he told me, well, I knew your mother came from a good family. So I knew nothing bad was going to happen to you. And I'm just thinking, what the fuck? You don't know, like people change. You know what I mean? What if I needed you for something? You know what I mean?
I was around the same age you were when my dad passed away, and he was around-ish growing up, but one of the things I think about with between myself and other peers is I have to have those conversations with my dad spiritually now. I've had to do that past the age of 14 because he's not physically here. You had this, for lack of a better term, absentee father growing up. You reached out to him. You had a chance to say things or at least have a relationship with a father that some of us wish or do not wish that we could have. But in the case of me, there are many things I wish I could have heard or learned or seen from my dad. Tell me about how the relationship developed from there.
This was in 2007, 2008, something like that. I met up with him and we had a talk, and our relationship was very stable after that. I would say it wasn't necessarily like a father-son relationship, to be honest with you. He gave me some money a couple times, but like it was never anything like father-son. It was like really, really, really close friends. We talk on the phone, shoot the shit, but he never really seemed very like concerned about my well-being. Like I hear some people would talk with their parents, even people my age, when they talk to their parents, they're like, their parents are like, "Are you doing good? Are you taking care of yourself? Do you need any money? Blah 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 blah." With him, it was never anything like that. It was like two friends talking, kind of like you and me. When my son was born, things changed a little bit. He came down. He spent about, I would say, like maybe 2 weeks, almost maybe a month with us. I know for me personally, seeing him interact with my son was probably the most beautiful thing that I ever seen, because I don't have any video of him interacting with me as a child or as a baby. I don't even have a picture of him holding me as a baby. I got to see my father interact with my son, and I kept thinking, is this how he interacted with me?
What made you decide to record during that time?
Obviously, I'm a big history buff and stuff like that. And I didn't know when we were going to be able to have those conversations again, right? So I just hit the record. We were driving up to Asheville, North Carolina. So I started recording.
I remember, like I've said before, I'm not too hip on the Bible, but there's a passage in the Bible that goes, I was feeling sorry for myself because I didn't have any shoes until I met a man with no feet.
And then the conversation came about his death. And he told me, listen, if I'm brain dead, or if I have, cancer and I'm in pain, just let me go. You've come to peace with that?
Yeah, I've come to peace with that. I've accomplished a lot in my life. I still want to do things, of course. But when I talk to my buddies in the park, I don't put them down. But it's sort of like, boy, you haven't been anywhere, you haven't done anything.
Take the next
you don't need a lot of
right
money to
south
travel.
Flagstock Road.
Have quality of life is what I talk about. And I have. So what can I, got nothing to complain about.
He's like, I lived a good life. I was in the however many countries there are out there. He was like, I've lived a full life.
How did all of this land for you?
It's one of those things where people talk about that a lot in my family, them dying and stuff like that.
Sure.
And, my dad was big into Santeria, and, Santeria is big on death and like the ancestors.
Sounds like there was a lifetime that was experienced in that one visit.
Yeah, there was. Mm-hmm. We were at the Amtrak station and we were talking, and I said to him, I know growing up you weren't really around. But then I said something around the lines of like, I forgive you. And I saw his eyes well up, and I've never seen my father cry. It was interesting because I had never seen my father show much of emotion about anything except for like women, so to see that part of him, it was really full circle moment.
Okay, there's a few things I want to follow up on. Number one, you so casually dropped that you said the words "I forgive you" to my father. That is sort of like when biography movies are made, that's the moment we land on, is like when the parent or the child says to the other, like, "I forgive you." So that's such a significant thing to say to any human being in your life. Why did you say that? What led you to say it and say it to him at that time?
Yeah, because, being a father, becoming a father was scary. It was really like when my son was born, they handed me the baby and I was like, oh, this is cool. And I handed him back to the doctor. And the doctor was like, no, 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 this is yours. You take him, right? This is your baby. I'm not taking him. And I was like, oh, shit, this is my kid. This is my responsibility. Like, there's no going back now. And that's a scary experience. So, looking at it through my father's lens, he grew up in the South Bronx, grew up poor, grew up impoverished, never really had anything. He meets, my mom, who comes from a good family. But I could see the amount of fear. I don't think, being a fatherhood is not for the weak. It's not. So I saw a level of weakness in my father. And then at the same time, I have a certain level of mediocre success. You know what I mean? I call it mediocre success. I'm not like a superstar or anything like that. I have a good paying job. I have, a roof over my head. I have clothes. So like at the end of the day, like I'm not really missing anything and I'm not getting anything back from forgiving him. I didn't lose anything by not having him in my life. That doesn't happen to everyone, but I got lucky in not missing out on anything by not having this man in my life. So me forgiving him was for him.
Did you see him differently in any other ways?
Yeah, when he was holding my son, I saw him in a different light. So I've never seen my father with children. Like I knew my father had children, but I've never seen him with children, like caring for his children, things like that.
Did you see him as a father in that moment?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I saw him as, it's like, oh, this is what he's like as a dad with a baby.
Tell me about when you got the phone call and how you reacted.
I think it was like 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock, something late like that. And it wasn't from my father. It was from his girlfriend. So when I picked up the phone and I said, what's going on? And it wasn't his girlfriend on the line. It was the neighbor. I think she said, my name is Jennifer Osorio or something like that. Victor's dead. And I said, excuse me? She was like, Victor's dead. And I could hear Vivian, his girlfriend, in the background crying. And then she said, I'm so sorry. And then she hung up the phone.
How were you feeling in that moment?
But I was feeling like finality. I was listening to the podcast, This American Life, and the host, Ira Glass, said, the interesting thing about hearing that somebody dies is knowing that you're never going to get to make new memories with them. You're only stuck with the memories you have.
Do those tapes sit now as the memories that you have with your dad?
They bring some kind of solace, I get a lot of solace in that my dad wasn't scared of death. That's where I get a lot of my solace from.
One thing I think about our fathers is that their death sometimes can feel less painful than their absence during our adolescence. At least that's the way I hold it sometimes. And I find I need to deal with that. I'm finding I surprisingly need to deal with that more and more as I get older. This void I have, I'm a little bit older than you, but this void I have where I'm like, here I am, I'm in my 40s and I'm still looking for a father. And so I'm curious for you, you're a dad now, but also you're 37, you're moving into that next decade. What is the legacy that you're grappling with in having to raise yourself as a man or in terms of searching for mentorship?
It's really not searching for mentorship in the same way that I was when I was a teenager, obviously, or in my 20s. Mm-hmm. I look for examples. I look at men in their 40s and I'll say, this is what I want to be as a man in my 40s. What do I need to do now to get to that point? Mm-hmm. I want to do things now that make a legacy for my son. This is a TED Talk that my father gave about the history of Puerto Rico. My dad won an award for Creative Business of the Year in South Carolina. These are things that I'm doing now to make a legacy for my son, so that my son, when he gets whatever age he gets, he, like me now, he can look at that and say, that's what I want for myself when I'm in my 30s, when I'm in my 40s, whatever it may be.
One big difference, current difference between you and I is that I have yet to become a father, although it's something that my wife and I we're currently talking about. And it's something I think about a lot, and how I will use what I've gained from grief as well as what I've decided to take from my father and my interaction with my father, and how I'll apply it to raising a child or children. I'm going to put this in quotes correctly. What piece of advice would you give me as somebody who's a peer, somebody who has some similarities with you about raising a kid? What is Anthony's true blue advice you can give me right now?
Put the phone down, put the computer down, spend time, because it goes by so fast. And I say that as somebody who I only have a 3-year-old, right? But I look back and I'm like, damn, time is flying. I looked at pictures of him last year. He doesn't even look the same. He's not even the same person. Elizabeth Velasquez, she's an author. She said something, you are responsible for the memories your children have of you. And that hit me. Because I'm like, I look back at the memories I have of my dad, and some of them are not so good. And some of the not so good memories are unavoidable, right? The disciplinary stuff, but some of them are avoidable, the irresponsibility. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for the memories that your children have of you.